Welcome to the Solar Cycle podcast, powered by Organic Transit, where we explore the future of clean mobility, sustainable cities, and the innovators reshaping how we move through the world. Join host, entrepreneur, and storyteller Justin Starbird as he takes you inside the ideas, technologies, and real-world impact behind the revolutionary ELF, the world's most efficient solar-powered vehicle. Thanks for joining us. Let's start today's cycle.
Welcome back to the Solar Cycle podcast. My name is Justin Starbird, and today I get to launch this podcast with a new friend, good friend, CEO, co-founder of Organic Transit, which is now part of your new company that you used to buy back the original, which is exciting. We're going to get into that. Rob, great to have you on today.
Thank you, Justin. It's great to be here.
This is quite the initiative that we have here to relaunch Organic Transit. So much to get into today about the journey. But, you started this company way back in 2012. Talk a little bit about, who you are right now or who you were and how we got here today.
Yeah, so in 2012, we actually started designing the ELF, which is our primary vehicle, in 2010. And we knew all the technology was available to create a tiny solar vehicle that was really practical for many people, but it didn't exist. So we started working on it in 2010, did a variety of really low-scaled prototypes, and around 2012, I joined an incubator in Durham, North Carolina, and it was like a few months, and that kind of put the initiative in place to this is how you do a startup, this is how you generate early capital and things like that, and we just went at it, and in a few months we had the prototypes done completely, working prototypes. And then in a few months, we had 7 more ELFs. And a few months later, we had all the tooling done. And a few months later, we sold 51 of them on Kickstarter.
Yep.
And 8 months later, we delivered all 51. And we just kept on building them from that point on.
So you mentioned ELF. That is the product. Talk a little bit about what that is, because it is certainly not going on anybody's shelf today.
So the ELF is a solar pedal electric vehicle. It is 3 wheels with what they call a tadpole design, 2 wheels in the front, and it has a advanced polymer body. It's kind of like a really advanced kayak body with aircraft aluminum tubing, and most of them are 2-passenger. With about 1 horsepower of power. It gets the equivalent about 1,800 miles per gallon, and the whole vehicle itself weighs 160 pounds. So the intent was, why do we have multi-ton vehicles carrying a 200-pound person? Let's make a vehicle that's actually as light as the person that's carrying around. Yeah. And that relates to a massive amount of efficiency, smaller batteries, easier manufacturing, and we built it for resiliency. So there's no paint anywhere involved. So that eliminates all the volatile organic compounds and spray booths and all that. All the hardware is stainless steel. All the framework is aluminum, and all the colors impregnated into the body panels. So it's made to be super efficient, much, much safer than a bicycle, and give you all-weather versatility to carry 2 people up a hill, carry your groceries, and have no insurance, registration, or license necessary.
That is incredible. I'm curious, what was the inspiration? I know you say that you had, you joined the incubator, and that gave you sort of the framework to become an entrepreneur, but certainly you have had inspiration well before that.
Right. So I used to be a vice president of the International Human Powered Vehicle Association. That was a group based out of Southern California at the time, and they were known generally for their 50 mile per hour, 55 mile per hour, 65 mile per hour, and ultimately 90 mile per hour bicycles on flat ground. And So as the VP of land, I got to see hundreds and hundreds of different types of vehicles coming through all the time, made by backyard inventors and scientists and college teams and all those things. And you look at them, it's like, wow, that's amazing. It's not 100% complete, but that's great the way they did the steering. That's great the way they did the brakes. Oh, that's an aerodynamic, efficient design. All these sorts of things weighed in on how do you build a vehicle to be sort of like the Honda Civic of little bicycles.
Okay.
That's super practical.
Yeah. When was that? Was that your career? I mean, you actually held a number of positions through your career, as well as, being the vice president of the organization.
Right. So I was working for Porsche at the time in Southern California, and a fellow up the street from me essentially was building the pedal-powered aircraft, the Gossamer Condor and Gossamer Albatross, and they were crossing the English Channel flying on like a half of a horsepower, and it made me realize everything that we're doing is absolutely wrong. And we were building 500 horsepower street cars for wealthy people that wanted to show off, and so this gave me a different direction in my life. And I built some recumbent bikes, and then I built some streamlined bikes. And then I directed the first solar car race in the US back in 1988 in Visalia, California.
Wow.
And many of these things led to inspiration of what was called the EV1, the General Motors first electric vehicle. That was a stepping stone towards the Tesla. Lots of modern drones and hydrofoils all came out of that movement, which were essentially like engineers and scientists that were looking to almost pay penance for their working in the military industry. And here they're trying to do something really clean and wonderful with their knowledge and skills.
Wow. And so you took all this and decided that, hey, we should really put this together. So, I think that part, that gap there is such an interesting journey from what you've shared in terms of, putting things together. You moved, cross country to Carolina. What ended up being the final, I don't want to say straw, but really what gave you the pat on the back to actually get this started?
So I was a creative director for a while, um, for a multimedia company, doing lots of videos and documentaries and things. I worked for Anita Roddick, doing human rights campaigns, environmental campaigns, and but most of my bread and butter revolved around sports cars and things like that. But I did get the opportunity to put on human powered vehicle races and solar vehicle races in Canada and other places and stuff. I did a bunch of consulting. I built some boats. And around 2010, I was looking at doing a documentary on the bicycle, like, oh, what's the evolution of the bicycle? And as I really started digging into it, I was like, oh, but the one we were all hoping for does not exist. Right. Basically, bicycles are wonderful and elegant design, but they're very unsafe, especially in the infrastructure for bicycles we have in this country. And they didn't give you any weather protection. They're very difficult to carry passengers. They just weren't that crossover in between a bicycle and a car. And so when I realized there's no point in doing this documentary because the bike that we all want and need is not there. So that's what put me back on track of designing a whole new vehicle.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then, you just shared about the joining the incubator and launching. Then you delivered 51, but you didn't stop there. So, and kind of walk us through, the timeline to say 2019 or so.
Right. So, one of the interesting things about that Kickstarter run was, we sold the 51 in 30 days. And we knew we were losing money on each one, and yet it was still probably the highest paid item on Kickstarter to that time period, $4,000 a piece. So we were losing about $800 a vehicle at that time, 2012 pricing. But to get the feedback from 50 vehicles was so much cheaper doing it that way because people did thousands of miles. And during the process, we kept on building and scaling. And we we ended up doing 400 changes that we iterated right into the manufacturing line. And we were building them in downtown Durham, which, you don't really manufacture things in downtown locations, but that's where we were. And that's what we did. And we always wanted to yeah, we wanted to also like have a coffee shop and a bakery as part of it. So we had a glass wall there so people could watch them being built and things. But, so we did the 400 changes and kept on evolving. And we did a lot of surveys with our owners. And we realized that people were averaging about 2,300 miles. That was the average per year on an ELF. So on a bicycle, mostly in the US, it's about 30, 35 miles a year, maybe 50 miles, not much. But some people were doing 8 to 12,000 miles a year and pulling trailers, going up Mount Whitney, 14,000 feet.
So they were modifying them on their own too.
They were modifying them on their own, and also, just doing things that we didn't expect. One of the things that we didn't expect was about 7% of the vehicles were sold to people with disabilities, people that won't drive a car and can't really ride a bike, and so there was a lot of that taking place, and also, people use them for work, for enjoyment. And it was really, really gratifying to see how many went out, how they were doing, how they were working with them. And so it came out to over 10 million miles, like 40 times around the planet. And we sold them in 15 countries, and people, like in France or Australia, or whatever, we're paying extra taxes, extra shipping, all that just to get them. And
well, not on the 51, right? Once you made those 400 iterations, how many were you selling a year?
So it kind of varied depending on the supply chain availability, but we were doing about 1.2 million revenue kind of per year, and we never raised a lot of money. We'd raised some money, but not a lot, not enough to scale. And we kept on rolling the purchase price into building more vehicles. So it sounds great, right? It's kind of like a bootstrapping sort of thing, but it's not a way to scale. And we knew that many, many people want ELFs. And, when they'd call up and we'd tell them, yeah, you have to pay 100% up front and it's going to take a couple of months to get it. Some of them were disillusioned, but if we could have just said, hey, here it comes, and it's $149 a month or something, we could have sold many thousands of them. And so we started doing a Series A round around, I guess, like 2018, 2019. And we had an investor that said, hey, we're going to do the whole round. And then we signed term sheets and they gave earnest money, and they never followed through. In fact, they even said, like, we'd rather take you over. And that's kind of what happened, and I was really shocked, but we were able to take back the company a little over a year ago. And
before we get to that, because I feel like we're, there's so much that happened in between. So you mentioned previously that, 1.2 million in revenue. How many units was that? That's 4,000 a piece, or did the prices go up, or eventually like you scaled that higher a little bit?
So the price kept on going up, and we actually had to make money at some point. Of course, we had about 30 employees, and around 2018, the average price was about $8,000. And people wanted more stuff. They wanted bigger batteries, bigger solar panels, carried an extra passenger, fancy wheels, bigger tires, all the things that people want and need.
Yeah.
And so we built about 850. We built probably closer to 1,000, but we delivered 850 vehicles in 15 countries.
Yeah,
and
that's where the 10 million miles comes from.
Exactly, yeah. And they were all basically bespoke built, right? People called us, told us, oh, we want the carbon fiber panels, we want this color, we wanted two-tone, and we just incorporated all those things. So each one was hand built in the U.S. but in a really cool iterative process, a very lean manufacturing basis. So, the vehicle is 160 pounds. There's not one part of it that weighs over, say, 25 pounds.
Mm.
So people don't strain their backs. You don't need a bunch of forklifts, essentially, mostly. It was really a clean process. And in fact, OSHA came in and said, we wish every company was half as clean as this. They were really impressed. And our goal was to bring, more people into the green economy.
Yeah.
And it was really, really impressive and, great people. It's amazing. We had about 30 interns from Duke University, mostly engineering students. And
nobody from UNC. You're Duke. You're Dukey all the way.
No, we had actually both UNC and NC State did studies on the ELF, the business proposal, the business plan, what it's like to scale in Southeast Asia, all sorts of really amazing things. And when you design a vehicle that fits between a bicycle and a car, it's a massive opportunity. And if you engineer it closer to a bicycle, that lean thinking reduces your manufacturing costs, reduces your supply chain. There's a lot of talk these days. You hear it from different EV manufacturers or from engineering authorities like Sandy Munro, and they'll say like the best part is no part, which is great, right? Is a great engineering and design direction to go in, and the ELF is like the epitome of that, right?
No wasted parts.
None at all. In fact, a lot of the plastic, when we trim the bodies out, we would take those other pieces of plastic and before they get recycled, we'd turn them into other parts.
Okay. Oh, wow. That's incredible.
Yeah.
So you sold 850. You had them. They traveled 10 million miles, 40 times around the globe, and you started to open a Series A round with all the intention of scaling. What was, thinking about, the traditional fundraising process? What was that? And what was that like, in 2018, 2019 while you were getting going?
Well, it's perhaps fundraising in the conventional sense, not the crowdfunding sense, is always like this amazing challenge, right? Dozens of investor decks, and they all have their own goals and intentions, and many of the VCs, they're like, oh, we really love this, and I want to buy a few of them for my family, but we really don't get into solar vehicles, and you say, look, this vehicle, we have people in Southern California and Arizona that have never plugged them in. They'll park them in the sun, ride them 20, 30 miles a day, and do that for years.
Yeah.
And so the ELF actually has the potential to generate more energy than it consumes. So it ends up being a net positive, which is an amazing attribute. And the new ELF 3.0 we're working on will actually contribute to the household backup, electrical backup during storms and things like that. And
which is exciting. We have a whole show dedicated to that next.
Okay.
So that I can't wait to dig into that. I mean, but it's incredible what you guys have accomplished and what you previously had accomplished.
Yeah, thank you. It was, looking back, it was an amazing time, right? Lots of 100-hour weeks, and just kind of jumping from project to project to project inside the ELF.
Yeah.
And yet, the energy was there, and the feedback from the consumers was there. It was really amazing. People, just riding them through the mountains day after day, like in Colorado, people commuting to work in the mountains in the winter in Colorado.
You got snow tires, right? The snow tires, like you made all the accessories as well.
Right. In fact, I have to believe we're one of the first bicycles to have a heated and cooled seat.
That would be, I mean, that's awesome. Living in North Carolina, it does get cold, or it gets chilly. It doesn't get cold. Where I sit in Maine, it gets cold. So, having that heated seat is that's a game changer.
Yeah, yeah. So that was one of the cool things. But there's lots of things like that, right? But it turns out they're really good in the snow.
Yeah,
And, we have videos of people climbing snowy roads
that's
um, with a lot of impacted ice. And one of the things also, North Carolina and other southern states, it does get tremendously hot enough where you really don't want to ride a bike. And the elf, in that case, provides shade. So when you're in the shade and it's 108 degrees, life can be kind of okay. Certainly okay enough where you can kind of pedal around or scoot around on the throttle.
yeah.
And it's an amazing attribute, really.
Absolutely. So you went through and you did the Series A. You got, led down this road where somebody was going to help you out. Talk a little bit about how that went south. Like, what are some of the things that were promised and then pitfalls maybe for others to avoid?
So, there is a kind of a business strategy for some reason for sometimes investors to come in and really want to end up taking over. That's the intent. You might not realize it, and I'm not the first to understand it or realize it, or the last. And many companies have gone through this, and you really want team players to come on board. And that's one of the things we find so attractive about crowdfunding is like everybody that wants to participate wants to participate. They're not looking to take over, right? Whereas,
Right, $100 investment's a whole lot different than 100,000 or 10 million.
right. But it's kind of like you're all on the court, playing basketball, and you toss the guy the ball and he runs off the court with it. And you go, what happened? What was that about? And, after that happened more than once, one of them were kind of successful at that. And, it was a challenging and difficult time, but, I think lots of entrepreneurs can relate to that. And we were able to get it back. When the new owners got the company, they never really did anything else, right? I don't
So
know.
what happened? They kick you guys out, and then how did that process go? Where before you were able to get it back? Because really, we're talking about a comeback story here, and then just trying to hear about like how south it really did go.
Yeah, so they wanted to. They said, "Look, Rob, we're going to take over the company, but you got to be involved. We know we can't do it without you." I'm like, "What the heck? Why don't we just do what we plan to do, right?" We signed term sheets and such for that, and so in order to protect as many of the investors and share, just people involved with the company as possible, vendors and things, we put it into bankruptcy when that entity then purchased it out of bankruptcy for a couple of $1 million, put another $1 million into it, and then really did nothing. And as soon as I said, "Hey, I thought we're doing something together," yeah, not so much, and then they, over a period of a couple of years, they built like 2 vehicles.
Hmm.
And I think eventually they realized, doing this is a lot more challenging than they thought. And I picked it back up in very much disarray. It's the kind of the
Did
old
you buy it
axiom.
out of bankruptcy, or how did you get it back?
I purchased it from the entity, the energy company that bought it, and paid off their debts and things like that. And I was grateful to get it back, but it is easier to start a new company than to resuscitate an old company. But it had a tremendous brand, it had a tremendous following, and really, I didn't want to corrupt the essential designs of the Elf. Right? We have a great utility patent that really changes the center of gravity and handling characteristics and things like that. That is great to roll out into a family of vehicles.
Yeah.
So all that's behind us now, and we are firmly in place, and just really launched this crowdfunding campaign, and the responses we're getting are really fantastic.
Yeah, so you created the Environmental Transit Authority, which is ETA, which owns now organic transit and all of its properties. And you were able to pull all the assets along with it, including, your old owners, social media, and all the channels. What has been that like to kind of organize, put the house back together?
So, it's the digital world, right? Like, oh, this password doesn't work anymore. Oh,
Yeah.
this doesn't recognize me. What happened to the G Drive data room? All those things kind of faded away in many regards. So that is and was a challenge. But there's still, thousands of people that want to see this happen. And I'm so grateful to them because they kind of break through the barriers and, reach out to us and say, look, my daughter, she's disabled. This is the only way she's going to get around. We need this. So actually right now we're instituting another branch of the company that's dedicated to service and parts and restoration of older elves.
Mhm.
And so those 850 elves out there can get properly maintained. And the amazing thing is, I saw like an odometer for an elf the other day. It had like 72,000 miles on it.
Wow. Wow. That's incredible.
And yeah, it's ridiculous. I mean, bicycles generally don't do that. So that was the crux of the whole thing, right? Is like,
Yeah.
how do you take a bicycle type technology and give it like automotive type of robustness, right?
Yeah.
And that's the underlying challenge.
Yeah.
And in many regards, we accomplished it. And what we learned from all of that is what the ELF 3.0 will be doing, right? It'll have all the things you always wanted in the earlier ELF and didn't have and wasn't available. Much of that's going to be incorporated into the new ELF.
Yeah. And to get there, you've decided, of course, to maybe skirt a traditional fundraising initially and what made you think of, doing a community round or a crowdfunding campaign, and using WeFunder? Talk us through, what the journey to that was like. What was sort of your decision-making process?
So, when we were trying to hold the whole company together back in 2018, 19, um, you know, that could have been an opportunity for us to do crowdfunding at that point. Um, we were extremely successful on the Kickstarter side, and it wasn't like people just bought elves. They were sending us multi-$100 donations
Hmm.
on Kickstarter. Like, we really want to see this work and things like that, sending us gifts. It was just amazing. And so I always knew the public really wanted it. I pull up to a grocery store and the cashier would be like, wow, what is that? How can I get involved? I want to invest in that, right? And so the general people in the public always wanted it. And
Yeah.
when it came to the high end investors, they were always like, yeah, I really like it, but we don't do this kind of thing, And most of them, we're in a software world. That's obvious, right? And people want to do software or pharmaceuticals or something. And but the public recognized it right away. We had them one time in a display in Santa Cruz, and a woman came up to us and said, I didn't have to explain there was solar or anything. She just said, thank you so much for doing this. Like, it immediately grokked with these people, right? They knew what they saw. And that's true of a lot of Europeans. And it's true, of course, of a lot of Americans. But most of us, myself included, you have to be made aware of it. What is it? How does it work? Why is it this way and that way? And how safe is it? And that's a major attribute, is the safety record of the ELF. We tracked about 25 accidents with the ELF, with cars and trucks. Now, generally in a bicycle or motorcycle, you get impacted by a car or truck, you're probably getting hurt, right? You're going to hit the pavement and you're going to get hurt to some extent, even if it's very light. Hopefully it is. But we all know that's not always. And out of 25 accidents we tracked, sometimes with trucks and cars hitting at like 50 miles an hour, no one was killed and there was no serious injuries. And that's amazing. And
Yeah.
so we've designed a safety cell in the ELF,
Hmm.
inside of it, that the whole structure itself is about safety. And that's something bicycles just can't accomplish, right? I don't care how much AI you throw at it. A bicycle is going to be a bicycle, and a car is going to be a car. So, so it answers a lot of the things: hill climbing, weather protection, carrying passengers and cargo, and safety, which is one of the big kahunas.
Yeah, of course. And so, all that with the feedback initially from the public led you to want to give an opportunity to the elf community, to the folks that have seen this from the beginning. And now you've recently opened an opportunity on WeFunder, the crowdfunding platform. What's included? What are you hoping to raise? What are you looking for?
So within the CF regulations, on this round, we can raise up to 1.23 million, 1.23, and we can take investments as low as $100. And we have different perks at like $1,000 and $5,000 and $10,000 investments. We've had multiple, we've only been live a few days really, and we've already had multiple $10,000 and $25,000 investments. And in fact, we're going to implement now when somebody invests $100,000, they get one of the first 3.0 elves as an incentive.
Yeah, that's exciting. And what made you decide that WeFunder was the right platform?
Yeah, we researched them all really pretty intensely, and I really liked the vibe coming from WeFunder. They have a new show out now. I think it's called Warm Intro, and it really lets you know like who some of the participants are and were and what they've gone through. And it just seemed like a pretty equitable platform. And, regardless of what anybody says or thinks, initiating a crowdfunding campaign is a lot of work, and to do it right. And whether it's accounting or the legal status, all these things, you really have to get all your ducks in line. And then it's a lot of work to maintain it and get it going. And we felt like, WeFunder was the best partnership to do that with.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, we are, thankful to have the opportunity to work with you too, to help get the word out and share more about this. Hence the reason for this show, the new Solar Cycle podcast presented by Organic Transit and by extension, the Environmental Transit Authority. So this is really wonderful, Rob. With this show, I know we're hoping we're going to preview the ELF 3.0 in the next episode, which is exciting because it's been really 14 years coming, right? After, all these iterations, changes, the comeback out of both the bankruptcy and poor partnership. And now you and the team have really taken it back and are launching the right way, launching in a way where, the community has, some invested interests, quite literally and figuratively, right? So that's exciting. And then we're going to also explore more of the problem that we're trying to solve out there, and do a little bit deeper dive into the WeFunder rationale, why you did that, and the crowdfunding in general. Some of the things that you guys have decided to include in perks, and go into a little bit deeper in that. And then on the fourth episode, we will actually have one of our investors on to talk a little bit about why they joined this, I don't want to say crusade, but certainly the comeback for organic transit. So we're really excited to do that with you, and then see where it takes us from there.
Fantastic.
Well,
Thank you, Justin.
Yeah, no, man, I really appreciate this. I'm excited to be a part of this with you, and humbled to have the opportunity to, be able to tell your story. So thank you for that.
You're very kind. Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for watching.
All right. You've been listening to the Solar Cycle podcast presented by Organic Transit. On behalf of my guest, founder and CEO of Organic Transit and Environmental Transit Authority, Rob Cotter. Until next time.
Adios.
Thanks for joining us on the Solar Cycle, powered by Organic Transit. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to subscribe, share, and follow our journey as we bring solar-powered mobility to the world. To learn more about organic transit and the ELF, or to join our community round on WeFunder, visit organictransit.com.